Finally, in 1291, the Khan allowed the Polos to leave. They traveled by sea from southern China via India to the Persian Gulf and back overland to Venice. Perhaps there were epidemics, typhoons, or shipwrecks, for only 18 of the 600 passengers of their expedition survived. But Marco arrived in Venice a rich man, or so they say.
Well, a lot of stories about how Marco came back into Venice. The one I like the best is he comes in looking like a beggar, and he is wearing this ratty old coat. He whips off the coat and pulls out the lining, and inside, the lining is lined with all kinds of gems and precious stones, and everybody then knows it's Marco Polo, and he's about to tell his stories to the world.
The great problem with Marco Polo and his travels or his discovery of the world is that we don't have the original manuscript. This has disappeared completely. What we have are a number of manuscripts which were copied from copies from copies from copies. There are maybe 150 early manuscripts of the text of Marco Polo, and every single one of them is different. Now, if you don't have the original manuscript, it's very difficult to track back to the source. Where do the stories come from?
Well, there's one thing that a lot of people don't know. For years, Venice had been fighting a sea war with its rival Genoa, and shortly after his return, Marco was put under house arrest. The world's greatest traveler actually wrote the book from the four walls of a prison cell. It was under these circumstances that this legendary book was written, dictated to his cellmate Rustichello, a famous writer known for his romantic embellishments. So perhaps it was this ghostwriter, Rustichello, who was responsible for some of the exaggerations.
I think in the end, we've got to try and make a balance between the queries, the problems, the omissions, the doubts, and the question of whether he went to China or not. And for me, it's fairly clear he didn't, but many other people feel very strongly that he did. I think in the end, we can't prove anything with fingerprints or DNA by now. 700 years have passed, and in the end, it's really just a question of faith.
You know, for every argument the naysayers have about Marco, I've got an answer. And I'm the only one that's done this trip. It's one thing reading about it and figuring out where he went from a library seat back in London, but when you're out on the road, you can't help but be a big believer in Marco Polo. He's too right on.
I believe it was God's will that we should get back in order that people might learn about the things that the world contains. Never was there a man who ever traveled over so much of the world as did that noble and illustrious citizen of the city of Venice, Messer Marco Polo. Thanks be to God. Amen. Amen.